Hello there, beautiful. How are you doing today? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Joesephyr, and welcome to another Should You Pull video for Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia. Now, in today's video, we're going to be covering the new Dimensions End Transcendance tier, which is Transcendence 4, and also another character that's coming back hot on the heels of another FF7 character in Yuffie with Barret, who is coming back with some crit buffs and some better auras and a little bit of a rework. But is his LD worth pulling for? Let's go ahead and find out. So if you'd like to know more about Barret and Dimensions End Transcendence 4 itself, then as always, stay tuned and keep on watching. Now, of course, before we get started, don't forget to check out all of my social media links below, including Twitch, where you can come and find me streaming 5 times a week, including Dissidia Opera Omnia for every event that comes out, Final Fantasy 14, and lots of other stuff. And of course, as well, we don't forget about Patreon, where I shall shout out one of my patrons at random every time I release a brand new video. And today that person is going to be King Stannis, who has Sid on their title card, which I made especially for them, as I do with all of my patrons. And a massive thank you goes out to all of you for supporting my channel and enabling me to make the videos at the frequency in which I do. So if you're interested in getting a title card and all sorts of other benefits as well, then be sure to click on the link in the description box below if you'd like to support the channel further. And of course, don't forget to check out all of the other content creators that are related to Dissidia Opera Omnia and all of the other resources that pertain to the game as well. Okay, so first things first, let's take a look at the banner and what's going to come along with it and whether it might be for you, as well as looking at Barret and his rework and his new LD. So this banner actually doesn't just feature Barret, but also features Yang and his LD as well. Now, obviously, if you go back a couple of months, then you'll see a video from me where I've talked about Yang in the past, and the same kind of rings true for Yang then as it does now. Like, there are certain characters that make really good use of Yang, particularly characters like Tidus, Terra, that kind of thing. So if you picked them up recently but you don't have access to Yang, then that's a reason for you to perhaps throw a few bits of pieces here if you wanted to, but nothing's really changed for him. So it goes to say that the need for him hasn't really changed either. So yes, he can make some really interesting sort of like kits and bits and pieces alongside characters that take a lot of turns very quickly, but by and large he's not really a necessary character. He's just kind of fun to have. Now, Barret also comes along with his EX and LD as well. Yuna, it'll be the last opportunity to get her BT, and Snow's along for the ride with an EX on its own. So with Barret does actually get a rework, but I'll talk about his existing skills first things first. Now, if you haven't used him before, he is an attack and max brave aura bot that happens to do some damage. Like, it's not incredible damage, but it's some, and he just continues to buff party max bravery and attack, and this will continue with his LD, and he relies on a stacking buff called Avalanche, which comes from him using his grenade bomb, so that you can get more percentages of the attack and max bravery, party attack, max bravery, etc., so that you get more out of it. So that, like, the auras are pretty good. They're not anything groundbreaking, but in combination with the damage that he can deal through Brave Shaving, it's not too bad. And then his big shot is a single target Brave HP attack that gives physical attack up, so it's obviously separate from regular attack. So for physical attacking characters, he does actually augment their attack quite a lot. Now, with the rework, when you use Big Shot, it now does 80% splash damage to non-targets, which makes it a significantly better move, because while it doesn't hit with multiple HP dumps, we'll see when we get to his EX that he does kind of have that on everything. And then with Grenade Bomb, it makes the Avalanche buff slightly stronger, so when your party attack goes up, it will go up to a total of 40%, and he gives himself 90% max brave and attack up, so it's his kind of typical I give myself offenses like increased, but it does it to a lot bigger degree, and he happens to include the party along with it. The Brave attack and HP attack plus we can ignore because he gets a better version of it with his LD. Now, his EX gave him Satellite Beam, which was a relatively, I want to say it's a relatively damaging attack, because it is in Bravery. It has a single HP dump that's split HP damage, which that's not good. Not at this point in time. Like, there are weaker EXs, but the thing is, with this EX, you're going to need to be using it regularly in order to keep Satellite up. Satellite increases his critical hit rate up to 100%, so he always crits when he attacks, and his LD will extend this to the party as well. And you also get Beam following up on all of his attacks, so he does have multiple HP dumps in his moves, even though all of his stuff, except for his LD, is actually single HP dump. But 15 hit Bravery would be so good if it weren't split HP damage at the end. It's really sad. And then Satellite Beam itself, the actual like follow-up attack, is a 4-hit Brave HP attack that follows up on everything he does, and he also gets Brave Refund after doing it. So he does get bravery refunds on all of his moves, which is quite nice, but what you're really looking for from him is Brave Shaving and the fact that he's able to apply all of these nice buffs to your party while he's doing it. So if we go back to looking at his LD, so Anger Max, Maximum Fury, whatever they're calling it nowadays, is another interesting one because it's similar to Prompto's EX attack Trigger Happy, where it's single hit Brave HPs done up to 10 times after you've gotten all the LD boards. So it actually hits really, really hard. Like, it certainly can deal a lot of damage very quickly. And it also gives him another buff called Fury at Shinra, which is another like stacking buff like his Avalanche buff, but if this runs out, you never want this to run out, you can actually like reapply it back to where it should be, similar to Squall's Roaring Hammer buff. Roaring Lion buff, sorry. And this increases his Brave damage dealt, his HP damage dealt, party's Brave damage and HP damage dealt, and also makes it so that critical damage from his party members is also always at 100% the same as him. So, and he also can't drop below 10% bravery either while he's got this up. And the only problem that I see with this particular attack is that because it's such an important thing, and the only way of increasing the stacks of Rage at Shinra is to use the LD, you have to kind of make choices as to when you're going to use this, because you're only going to get the most out of it once you've used this for the 3rd time. Luckily, when you've done the LD boards and everything, he does actually start with a stack of Rage at Shinra for 6 turns, and then every time he uses it, it goes up to a 12-turn duration. So it does last a good long while, but you then have to make the choice of, do I use the LD early to get the stacks quickly? But then you need to worry about getting the Avalanche buff, so I would always prioritize that first because it's very easy to keep that up, whereas Maximum Fury, you've got a little while before you need to top it up, but you're also not getting as much out of it until later on in the fight. That's not to say that he's bad. His buffs give like a large amount of Brave and HP damage up. So we're talking 30% bravery damage and 15% HP damage dealt, which is good on a character that can shave bravery as much as he does. So he does get quite a lot out of it. But the problem with Barret is kind of, he doesn't do enough that's massively unique. Like, yes, he's got some really nice buffs on him. He's got HP damage up, Brave damage up, crit rate up to 100% for the whole party now, and attack and max bravery buffs, which is fine, but it's very good in fact, but when you're looking at other support characters that do a similar kind of thing to him, even if they don't necessarily increase crit rate, I'm looking at characters like Yuna, Aranea even can increase like crit damage, but through a debuff. She also kind of does the delay, the re-break. She has sort of field manipulation on board as well, and she could take her free turns, whereas Barret, after the fact that he's got these buffs, doesn't really do a lot. He just does damage and an okay amount. Like his LD does hit really hard, but he only gets 3 uses of it. So even once you've got the max number of stacks on Rage at Shinra, you're only going to be able to use this attack for its attack once. So that's kind of sad. I do think that, like, if you're a fan of Barret, he's similar to what I said about Yuffie and quite a few other characters. He's not going to disappoint you. He isn't bad. Like, he actually does bring a lot to the table, and he can even be used in certain early Lufenia Plus missions. Like, so he's definitely not a complete write-off, and there are certain situations where he does a lot of damage, like pairing him up with Setzer, for example. Like, not that he really needs it, because his crit rate's always high. Or Aranea, making critical damage higher, things like that. Or Kate Sith later down the line. There's a lot of combinations that do work really well with Barret, but by and large, I find that he kind of does a lot of the same stuff other support characters do, but without the actual support-based kit. His actual attacks are just attacks. That's all they really do, and they don't hit as hard. Like, I mean, the EX having split damage after 15 hits of bravery is absolutely criminal, if you ask me, even though he gets a follow-up after it. It's something, and then he gets 2 HP dumps because of his beam attacks after Grenade Bomb, and obviously Big Shot as well, and now he's dealing splash damage with Big Shot as well. It means that his AoE damage potential is better. It's just not up there with the greats when it comes to HP damage, but then the support kit is really strong in the physical damage aspect and the attack aspect, but he doesn't really bring an awful lot else to the table. In terms of his core abilities, etc., again, I personally find Barret to be a bit of a letdown. I mean, obviously he is designed to be a part of Dimensions End Transcendance 4 because one of the requirements on the right gate is a red crystal, and the orb wants you to do range damage, so obviously Yuffie and Barret fit that perfectly. But his core abilities honestly don't do an awful lot for you either. Like, Grenade Bomb gives you Max Brave and Party Attack up for a little while. And then Maximum Fury does give you the crit rate. It is a nice thing, but realistically, if you have Barret and you're in a mission that requires you to do critical damage, normally in a way that would require a buff like this, as in they're not broken the whole time, you're probably just taking Barret or someone like Aranea in your main party anyway, so therefore this call, in my opinion, isn't the most useful. There are applications for practically every call ability in the game, but this one is not one I'd be pulling out of the bag for like staples within my team. And in terms of his armor, he has support keystone, which is quite nice. It's not my favorite, like I prefer unity keystone personally, but I do think that support keystone is kind of good. And you know, in this day and age, we typically have enough Lufenia tokens, if you've been keeping up with Lufenias, that you're able to use regular Lufenia armor on most characters that you're using. And then he's got party brave damage up 10% and party max brave cap by 15%, which is very nice, but we've seen similar characters recently, like Rude, Yuffie, etc., that can keep up with it as well. Now, as I said earlier, I don't think Barret is bad. I don't think there are very many characters in this game that are bad. I do think, however, that he's quite narrow in what he does, and therefore there isn't much call for him in a lot of missions going forward. That's not to say you can't use him, because you absolutely can. There's proof on YouTube. It doesn't take long to search it up if you want to go out looking for it. But I personally think that from the last banner until BT Plus is a very good time to be saving, because there are some very, very heavy hitters going forward after Divine Pandemonium hits, like Aphmau, Sid Reigns. A lot of people are excited for Zac, Zidane, even Sync, LD. There's lots of characters that are very much more exciting and enticing to a lot of players than Barret. But if you are a big fan of him, you could absolutely make use of him in the right situations. And honestly, because he's narrow in what his applications are, it means there's not an awful lot that locks him out either. So if you really wanted to use Barret, you could use him in a fair few things. Okay, so let's talk about Dimensions End Transcendance 4 itself, and how certainly how I'm going to tackle the left, right, and centre gates, but also give some general tips and overviews on things you can do even if you're not using a similar team to me. So we'll talk about the left gate first. Now, the left gate is going to contain the Flan medleys, which we've seen before. They typically summon 2 smaller Flan medleys, and if you broke them, they instantly died, and then you'd focus on that one. This one is a little bit different, but before we go into that, we'll talk about the actual requirements. You need to have a white crystal character in your party, preferably one that cleanses debuffs. So obviously Yuna is the perfect character for this, but if you don't have access to Yuna, you could also use Penelo or Sarah or Queen if you've got access to her. There are characters that you can use that also cover that well, but the orb itself also asks you to cleanse debuffs off an ally. Aerith and Ignis, that kind of thing won't work here. You have to actively take the debuff off. So that means 2 things. You have to let the enemy get turns enough to put debuffs on you for you to cleanse them, because otherwise those turns are going to tick down really quickly. So you're just going to have to make sure you have a character like Yuna, like Penelo, even Balthea, something like that. Yuffie as well, because obviously she cleanses debuffs when she's throwing debuffs back at them as well. You've got to make sure you're able to cleanse debuffs as opposed to preventing them. Now, differently to how the Flans worked in the past, this time around the Flans just survive as normal. They work as normal enemies, but when you kill them, the big Flan gets a huge amount of bravery, massive amount of bravery damage reductions, and once he's broken, he then resummons the Flans again. Now, for this reason, single target damage is actually better for you, and keeping the mini Flans alive for as long as possible is also a better thing for you. So basically, single target damage, like Tifa is who I plan on using in this particular mission, or Vaughn if you have access to one of the ranged red crystal characters for the right side. I'm saving Vaughn for the right side because I don't have any other red alternatives, but he'll work very well here as well. just be careful of blind, because you are going to need to make sure that some debuffs are going on your character so that you can then cleanse them with your Yunas, your Pinellos, etc. Now, they do also have two modes. They have a fire mode, which makes them resistant to thunder and wind, and they have a water mode, which makes them resistant to ice. I honestly, in all of the videos that I've watched, I haven't seen what the trigger is to make the Flan switch from fire to water, but it changes their attacks up. Like the fire one will put a burn on you, which saps your 8 HP, and therefore in fire mode, I actually plan on using Celes here, because she... like Runic will make it so that any bravery damage won't do anything, because a lot of their attacks are single target and magic based, and also they're weak to ice and easy to imperil, and therefore this can be compounded with Kurasame calls and things like that. Now, I do worry a little bit about Celes, so Gladio is also an option here. You don't have to take a tank either. If you wanted to, you could take someone else that's more offensively tuned, or you could take Setzer here if you wanted to freeze the enemy bravery to stop their HP damage from doing anything untoward. But you have a lot of options here, as long as you are keeping hold of the idea that you don't necessarily want to be killing the mini Flans, because you need them to be A, applying debuffs, and B, not allowing the big Flan to get its massive generate body skill off and get all that bravery that you then break, and then he resummons them anyway. And you have to be able to make, like I said, make sure that they're able to inflict debuffs on you so that you're able to cleanse them specifically for the Lufenia Orb. Now, talking about the right gate, the right gate is slightly weird in that you're fighting against Ferrum Scorpions, which are a variant on Guard Scorpions from FF7, but if you take any kind of melee damage, as in, like, not physical damage, melee damage, they will get countered instantly and killed. And this includes characters like Golbez, who have mixed damage, so magic and physical, and also Tidus, who uses ranged as a follow-up on the shot, but obviously some of his damage is physical. Whatever physical damage you do, they will get killed. Therefore, you cannot take any physical or melee damage dealer to this fight. The reason I say melee, not physical, is because ranged physical damage is actually what you need to be doing in this particular fight, because it's what the Lufenia Orb asks for. Therefore, if you're taking enough ranged physical attackers, you can actually get away with a lot of no-turn count fights in this by taking the likes of Cypher, who is red and therefore fulfills the crystal requirement for this fight, as well as being a ranged attacker, so fulfilling the orb and delaying at the same time. So if you have Cypher around, he's actually very good for this. But obviously what this mission wants you to bring along is either Yuffie or Barret. Now, as someone who has not Yuffie, nor Barret, nor Cypher, there actually aren't very many options for red ranged attackers. So therefore, I'm actually taking Varn to this particular fight to cover my red crystal, while also being somebody that deals a boatload of damage really quickly. I'm also taking Setzer as somebody who has the freeze and some ranged in his kit as well, and obviously the dive bomb is going to make a lot of damage come about from Varn. The third character I'm actually going to take along to this is Trey, and he covers the ranged orb very, very well. You only get 2+2 from the orb whenever you deal ranged damage, so if you're taking characters like Aranea as well, that's also a very good shout. But Trey in particular, I think, is really good for multiple reasons. The first of which is because he does so many counts of off-turn ranged physical damage, the orb is not something I'll ever have to worry about, even though I don't have a huge amount of ranged physical damage in my team, so therefore I'm able to kind of just rely on him for that. Also, the fact that he has Firewall and the Delta attack debuffs on the enemies means that I'm not going to have to worry about dealing critical damage. Now, critical damage is very important to this particular fight, because when they hit certain HP thresholds, as is the case with many bosses, they put up a blue aura, which makes it so they have loads of defenses, loads of bravery, and they can't be instant broken, so that part of Trey doesn't work, and the party can't gain bravery, which will not do very nice things to Varn. In order to get rid of that buff, you have to deal critical damage to the enemy twice. Now, this can be done in multiple ways. Like I said, if you have Barret, then you have 100% crit rate anyway. If you have Aranea, as long as they have Vital Crusher on them, you have 100% critical rate anyway. There are characters that can do ways of circumventing critical damage by just having a lot of it, or you can use someone like Setzer, who gets around their defenses and breaks them naturally just by doing rainbow physical damage and hitting them really hard. And that's the other way in which you can do that, and then obviously there is a chance of physical damage regardless of whether they're broken or not, so characters that do off-turn damage like Trey should obviously help out with that as well. Now, Yuffie obviously works very well here as well because ranged damage dealer, lots of debuffs. They put a debuff on you as well, which makes it so that you take more bravery and HP damage. And then obviously Yuffie throws it back at them, so she's great for this as well. I've seen quite a lot of clears that use the likes of Cloud of Darkness, Kefka. There's actually a lot of characters that you can use for this. Just for the love of God, don't put any physical melee damage dealers in your team. Now for the Center Orb, there's actually two waves to this fight, as we have seen in other Transcendence tiers in the past as well. And the main theme of this particular fight is to do a large amount of damage in a short space of time without taking lots of turns in order to do so. Because both of these waves have a gimmick where if you take 10 turns without them acting, and that includes Burst Phase and Summon Phase, then the enemies will put up a paling that just says, I take no damage. I take 1 bravery damage from every hit and 0 HP damage. The only way you can get around the 1 bravery damage is with Setzer using rainbow attacks, but that, you know, you can use that for that if you want to. I am actually planning on taking Setzer to this event because not only do you have that to deal with, but the defenses of the second wave in particular get so high that most characters will just deal 1s. Like, it's so high, their brave damage reduction is massive, their defenses are huge, and you're expected to deal a lot of damage very quickly. So therefore, you're going to want characters that can help you circumvent that. So you can go about this by taking the likes of Setzer, or you can go about this by taking characters that have a lot of bravery gains in their kit. So Porum would work very well here, for example, alongside the likes of Yuna. So, you know, having characters that can do a lot of damage in a short space of time whilst being able to get around these huge defenses is going to be really good for you. Now, Wave 1 is the White Kirin, which were from Vayne's event, and these guys do the same thing as the second wave, where if you take too many turns in a row, they'll put up the paling, you can't hit them. But they also do like to take a lot of turns in a row, so once they do have a turn, you need to be very prepared to take damage. Like, you're going to be taking multiple hits in a row. They're going to use the White Light Black Thunder attack after they've done an attack which is an AoE Brave HP attack, and therefore you're then able to recover from it. So you need to be able to make sure that you're able to survive everything that they're doing. But past that, it's not that bad. Like, you only have to survive their hits while still dealing them a big chunk of damage. Damage dealer wise, characters like Tifa and Varn are going to do very, very well here because they do exactly what I'm saying, which is, as your primary damage dealer, they don't take a lot of turns to do loads of damage if they don't want to. Like, Tifa can spam turns if it's safe to do so, or she can just beat Rush Plus and deal a load of damage in one go. And then with Wave 2, they are like a similar variant of the Sanctuary Keepers. We actually fought a variant of them not too long ago. And then they will also put up massive shields. They put delays up on themselves, which makes it easier for them to then put the barriers up. And you just have to make sure that you're able to let them take turns while still dealing loads of damage. They don't actually do huge amounts of damage to you. It's more about keeping on top of the turn count, keeping on top of how much damage you're dealing them, so that you're able to keep up with it all. So, like I said, my team is planned to be Setzer, Yuna, and Varn. Now, Setzer, obviously, I can freeze the bravery on the horses, on the Kirins, so that they're not dealing damage to me with all these major attacks, and they're therefore able to, and then I can take advantage of Dive Bomb and the fixed dice buff, so that I'm able to deal lots of damage even through the massive defenses of the second wave. Yuna will augment everyone's brave and HP damage through percentile gains, keep everybody healthy if we do take damage, and then Varn is Varn and does lots of damage. But even past the point where you can't gain bravery, you just have to be very careful to use the likes of Setzer so that you're still able to deal lots of damage. Now, they're not the only characters that work, obviously. Agrius is a fantastic shout. The reason I'm not using Agrius or Porum in this particular fight is because I'm actually saving them for Dimensions End Transcendance 5. Because at this point, we are starting to get to the point where you can't use the same character across multiple tiers of Dimensions End, and that's starting to become apparent now that we're using 6 characters per tier, and therefore at this point we're up to 24, so you can't use characters you've used in previous tiers. So therefore I'm saving certain characters for DET5 so that I can try and make as easy a time out of this one as I can with other characters. So now of course we come to the big question of the video: should you be pulling on Barret and Yang's banner? Now, while I think that both Barret and Yang have merits to them, like if you like using characters like Terra or Tidus or Core even, then yeah, Yang's kind of nice to have. But at this point in time, I don't think he's somebody that you should be chasing after, because you're just not likely to use him very much after the start of BT Plus era. And honestly, the same could be said for Barret. Now, don't get me wrong, that's not to say that Barret and Yang can't be used in early Lufenia missions, or Lufenia Plus missions, because there's evidence to suggest otherwise, certainly in the case of Barret. But I just think that there are certain options that are a lot better for you in the long run, that will last for a lot longer, and like I said, with October looking to be a month with a lot of spending involved in terms of resources. There's a lot of characters. You have to kind of you roll with the punches when it comes to these banners and take any opportunity you get to save that is presented to you. And while, like, Yang is quite cool with his off-turn damage, we have the likes of Core and other characters, and X-Death when he comes around for off-turn damage as well, that'll do similar things. Even Sid Reigns does gargantuan damage off-turn thanks to his launches and the things he does during them. And then Barret does do damage, like his LD does good damage, but the rest of his kit doesn't really, and he has good auras, like good auras for offensive capabilities, but not great ones. So he's stuck in this weird point in the middle where he's like a bit of both, but doesn't lean heavily enough in either direction to really stand out in either of them, as opposed to somebody like Queen, who, while a bit of a jack of all trades, who has access to auras and healing and, you know, decent damage phases thanks to her EX. Barret doesn't really have a lot of that, and Queen has things like the party-wide last stand, and yes, Barret has his 100% crit rate buff to the party, but by and large, how often are you really going to need that? If you need somebody to cover or help you cover up on DE Transcendance 4, then yeah, Barret is going to help with that. But I think there are just much, much better options down the line that you could take this opportunity to save if you've got the chance. And then finally, of course, we have Would You Pull, which is the section of the video where you, the viewer, your beautiful viewers, get your chance to let your voice be known and let everyone know whether you would or wouldn't pull on any given banner and why. So as always, a huge thank you goes out to my patrons for casting their votes and their comments. Without you guys, I wouldn't be able to make this section of the video nearly as well as I can and how well received it's been. And if you'd like access to the full database of people's comments and those that have voted, then you might like to consider joining up on Patreon, because it's all listed in my Discord and places like that so that you can see them for yourself as well. So, going into the numbers. 8% of people said that they were going to use gems on this banner, 12% of people said that they were going to use 100 or more tickets, 27% of people said less than 100 tickets, and a whopping 54% of people said no. So, Barret, not the most popular character in the world for this particular regard, which is a shame, because Barret is a really cool character, and I think he's a really good just point of representation within the game, of which there isn't an awful lot within Opera Omnia, so it's a shame that he's not quite as good as he could have been. Anyways, going into some of the comments, Nalthian says, good ticket luck for Yuffie after a pity on Agrius and no Uni-BT means I'll be throwing at least 100 tickets in a last-ditch effort to avoid another BT token. Barret is fine, but I doubt I'd ever use him. I'm really just throwing a Hail Mary for Uni-BT. Which is fair. Like, if there's stuff that you don't have and you're still trying to get Uni-BT, then, you know, absolutely there's a reason for you to do it if you're saving your tokens for something else. But I just think that it's certainly if you already have everything else on the banner. If you didn't get it after trying to get Yuna's LD or Agrius, then honestly, and Yuffie as well, I think I would save Barret till last of those banners, but he's not terrible. And then Booper Wiggum says, I like Barret, but it's a skip for me here. I'll be going all in for Kane's LD in the future with gems, as he's a favourite, so I'll hopefully grab him here. Which is a good point to make, because Barret does return later in the future, but he's even less likely to get used then than he is now, to be perfectly honest. But Kane's LD is actually very strong, so that's a reason for you to save as well. Luca Yasha says, I'm going to be skipping this one. Sadly, Barret kind of suffers from the same reasons to why I'm not pulling for Yuffie. The main one being that there are much better characters to use over him. His own damage, even with his rework, is still on the lower side. His aura is, while decent, with Agrius still around, it makes a much better pick. And while the crit boost is nice, Setzer LD works just as well, and unlike Barret, doesn't require him to use it twice to gain full momentum. I do think it's very frustrating with Barret that the one button that you need to maximize his potential is the one button on him you don't want to spam. Like, his LD is his best attack, but it's also his most limited attack and the one that you're required to use to maximize his auras. So he's in this weird middle point where you have an attack you want to use, but you don't want to use it too quickly. It's really weird, and it's a real unfortunate thing for him. Nick finally says, I'm using gems, but not because of Barret. Having watched a few Lufenia clears, I've seen how useful Yang and his end of turn follow-up attack can be when combined with the likes of Terra or any BT phase, and I realise I've been missing out by not getting him in the past. I intend to capitalise on this opportunity now, and since I've mostly been getting by with tickets, I'm comfortable with pitying his LD if it comes to it. I'm also tempted to make a Terra, Core and Yang team just to be able to have 3 attacks in one turn. I do think that, like, if you've got an abundance of resources, Yang is a great fun character to have. Just be warned that going forward, his damage is definitely going to start to go down. Like, certainly with Lufenia Plus and the big damage reduction auras and Brave Gain, like, reduction auras, all that sort of thing, they are going to come into effect a lot more strongly. So Yang, he's fine, but just be aware that he's not a character that you're probably going to be using for a very long period of time. But if you really like the sound of the way he plays, absolutely, go. So that's going to be all for today's video. Thank you all very much for watching, and do leave a comment below and let everyone know whether you're pulling on Barret or Yang, or if you're still looking for Yuna's BT before we start approaching X-Deathbatch. And of course, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click that bell for notifications on any future videos I might be making. And then that's going to be it from me. So a massive thank you, and I shall see you all next time. Take care.